Hey friends, welcome to Into the Dark Forest, the secret language of the shadow. My name is Dr. Melissa Kim Corder, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you. I want to start with just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to be here with you for quite some time, probably about an hour or so, give or take. We'll see how this all goes. Sometimes I talk very quickly, so I might run through my material at a rapid pace. And so what I'm going to ask of you is please feel free to share in the comments, feel free to reflect and to ask questions. But what I'm going to do for our time is I'm going to focus on what it is I want to share with you. And then what I'll do is after we're all done here, I'll come back through and then I'll comment and I'll respond. So if you have questions, you have comments, remarks, all of that, my typology, I'm an INFP, and so what that means is I truly need to focus. And there's so many places I want to take you in this exploration today that I don't want to go down too many different rabbit holes. And I have a tendency to do that when I'm reading the comments. So thank you for being here. I'm so thrilled that you're taking the time to be with me today. It means a lot. I hope that you receive something beneficial and maybe even eye-opening or unique from today's experience. I know this material changed everything for me when I started to really kind of dive into it. So let's begin. Thanks for being here. And once again, just use the comments below to share, to ask questions, what have you. And then when we are all done and I wrap it up, I'll come back and make sure to engage with you and to interact. And feel free to tag me as well. If I miss a comment or something of that nature, reach out. You can also email our office. My email address is melissa@melissacorder.com. So once again, today we're jumping into something called Into the Dark Forest, the secret language of the shadow. All right, friends, let me pull up my notes in the background here. Make sure all is well. By the way, what do you think of my little background I've got going on? We've got lots of reds and different red lights going on. I've got my favorite little witchy chair here. It's amazing what your environment does for your creativity. And so even just investing in this chair started to really change the way that I went deeper into this work. So let's jump in. So I once read this description by someone who's a Jungian analyst. Her name was Marion Woodman. She's no longer with us, but her work is incredible. It's timeless in a way. And this description that she gave about metaphor really stood with me. So what she said is that metaphors bridge gaps between matter and spirit. They reveal consciousness. The Greek word metaphor means to carry across the realm of matter into symbols of the spirit. There's just something really powerful about that idea. For me personally, I tend to speak in metaphor. I have been using metaphors since I was a child. In fact, there's not really a single time that I kind of look back and go, oh, that's when I started speaking in pictures or symbols or images. But one thing that was kind of unique about that is the images and the symbols that I would tap into were considered really dark or disturbing. They were graphic, they were intense. And that's just what dominated my thoughts in my childhood. So I know it sounds kind of weird to say or to maybe just hear that. And it's true, I was very much haunted by them until I healed, until I realized that these psychic impressions, these inner images that we have, were actually giving me a way to express the energy that I was pulling in from my environment. I'll go a little bit into that, but sometimes this is what we do when we're tapping into deeper patterns within our environment, within our household, within ourselves. Our psyches are uniquely connected to one another. And this language, sometimes these images gives us a way to decipher things that are really overwhelming, especially when we're sensing things at a young age. Now, there's so many impactful moments that have shaped my work, and it wasn't necessarily like a single vision or something else that really got me here. It was more this idea of where I grew up and what that was like. So it was kind of in this haunted forest. It surrounded my childhood home. And what's interesting is that I really believe there were ghosts within and around our property. And I'll kind of speak to that further. When I say ghosts, I don't always mean literal. Sometimes I'm actually speaking to these psychic impressions, these internal images that we may have, that we pick up from other people. Now, sometimes it's generated within us, and other times it's what we're just tapping into from the environment. So when I say ghost, I am really talking about forms of energy, a presence, a lingering sense. I like to play with the idea of things haunting us because we are all haunted by something. Now, there is a very physical component that I will share. The physical area that I grew up in, this house that I lived in, let's just say my loved ones were plagued with various forms of, let's just call them patterns. We're all influenced by patterns. We all have a story and a history. And in my household, there were different types of patterns that tended to create conflict, right? Inner turmoil. So I had one influence of what we might refer to, and I say this very compassionately, is mental illness. Mental illness was a huge part of my childhood, learning how to cope with that with the loved ones around me. And then there was also this inability to be with emotion by numbing out or shutting down feeling or numbness, sensation. And so I also had authority figures who struggled with emotion, didn't know how to tap into that whatsoever. So those extremes created a really bizarre and interesting environment. Now, some of us are really attuned to those emotional states, and so we pick up on things. We feel these things. They don't always have to be spoken, right? It isn't about just what comes out loud, what we hear, what we're told. It's what we sense, what we're tuning into. Now, for me, I also, not only was I kind of swimming in all of that emotional turmoil and chaos, my intuition was through the roof. I don't know, it could be chicken or egg situation, right? Which came first? Was my intuition really developed and strong because I was in this emotional, difficult current of reality with these, I want to say, different rhythms and currents of energy going on and conflicting with one another. And sometimes that can create a hypervigilance within us. So we are more aware and dialed into things. Or was I just kind of born like that and therefore aware of that more often, the patterns of other people, their psychology, their thought processes, the things they weren't saying, but I would feel in their fields and say on their behalf, and then get in trouble for it, not realizing that at a young age, people had secrets. They had things they didn't want exposed. And here I was, this little kid wandering around, just saying all the things that other people didn't want so publicly shared. As an adult, when I actually think about that, I kind of still do the same thing. I still tell the truth about things, right? So I grew up in this environment that really created conflict within me. It was hard to be with those oppositional feelings and emotions, especially the things that weren't spoken, but just felt. So hang with me here. I promise all of this is going to go into this territory of the dark forest. We've already entered it together. Again, speaking in myth and metaphor, you'll see where I'm going. But back to this little bit of a story first. So I spent all of this time in the woods, outside, playing outside of my home, exploring. My favorite game was to play detective. I would dig in the woods. I was convinced I was going to solve a crime. I was always looking for dead bodies. It was my favorite childhood game. What was kind of interesting about all of this is later I did find out that these are the same woods where there was a serial killer who used this territory as a dumping ground for their victims. So that's kind of interesting. I do sometimes talk about true crime. I will admit I'm not going to go very deep into that aspect today. That's probably as far as I'll go with that for those of you that have no interest. But just know that true crime has its place. It's not about glorifying those details, but instead to say these are the dark fairy tales of modern time. There's a reason we're drawn to those things because they too have something in it for us to explore. So I spent a lot of time in the woods outside of my home. You know, it's something I feel like now that I work with clients and I do this work differently, I recognize this similar trait in them too. They used to find solace in nature, close to the earth. Things that felt very much like that mothering, nurturing energy, but through the safety of nature, because sometimes we couldn't find that in our household or through the caretakers or authority figures that happen to be a part of our lives at that time. This is interesting to pay attention to as well. So there is a shift. I'll share mine, but there's a time usually when we have this enchanted view. And I had that very much so. I really believed the world was enchanted. The forest, the woods all around. I had this childlike wonder. Also because there were deer, there were raccoons, there were all of these incredible creatures. We had bears. And I was so sensitive to nature that I would go into the woods to look for the creatures, to kind of hang out, just watch and observe. But that sensitivity also translated to human nature. So that depth of love that I had for the natural world also was the same depth I couldn't control when it came to my emotional states of others, my interpretation of that, my being tapped into that. I would see, sense, and feel them as well. And that wasn't always pleasant. And so there is sort of this interesting mythic quality already emerging. And this is why I called this Into the Dark Forest. There's a lot of metaphor layered in with real life experience. Something else that would happen is I could see things change in real time. I could sense the shift of a mood. I had this strange way of just kind of knowing when there was manipulation or deception. I think we all do this, but I was just really hyper aware of it. My body was kind of a barometer in a way. I just knew things based on how it would kind of land in my system. Whether these things were true or otherwise, I would feel them. But many of us, I find, that do this are also on some level, whether it's conscious or not, we are taught to not trust the wisdom of our body. Instead, we start to listen to the authority figures. We start to look to them for what to believe, what to think, what to feel. We go for their directives because they are in charge, right? They're older than us. They create our world, our sense of safety. And so sometimes it's a very conflicting feeling to also have that, to have these deep feelings and then also recognize that they don't match with what is happening in the world around you. So for me, that led me off path. I ended up for decades getting lost in substance abuse, self-betrayal. I was the nice girl. I let things really rattle me. I didn't have a strict sense of self or a cohesive sense of self. Now I get what's going on there, and I work with this quite often. I refer to it as breaking this trance of disempowerment that some of us go through. I've had some experiences, and you may or may not be able to relate to this. We might call like psychological, spiritual soul retrieval, where we essentially go back into these different times and spaces in life and reclaim these pieces of ourselves, the pieces that we leave there. For me, it was back in those woods and in my childhood. Now today, I embrace all of that, and it's a part of my skill, my perception. I am definitely more oriented toward the darker currents of human life and human behavior. It's the place I just feel most at home in my work. And I feel very blessed to be able to do this work. I get to talk and speak, teach and write in metaphors and spend my time translating some complex psychological concepts through these mythic structures and symbolic language. So that's kind of what I want to do here with you today. And then, of course, you don't have to resonate with my darker aesthetic or anything. You don't need to feel the same way about those pieces to resonate with what I'm sharing as far as the intuitive relationship between sensing the outer world and the inner world and the inner images that you may or may not have regarding that in the psychic landscape that we're entering together. Because there's probably a part of you that is responding And again, you don't have to study any of this stuff. You don't have to be into dark psychology or the criminal mind or any of that kind of stuff. But if there is a part of you that feels drawn to this work, pay attention, because there might just be something that you feel is trying to call you home to yourself. Because that was a big part of it for me. It wasn't so much about just finding myself. And I'll talk about a client experience I had actually with her finding her voice in this very mythic, creative kind of way. But it is about trusting your instinct and retrieving more and more of your intuitive function out of what we call shadow. Now, when I talk about shadow, when I say words like darkness, shadow, there is a tendency for people to go right to the negative or have some type of unconscious association with shadow. And I just want to say that I know there can be really intense experiences, traumatic things that have happened. And I just want to remind you, especially being an expert in this area, that what I have found for people is this is where they're usually missing a significant piece of teaching on shadow. And that is that your shadow works in tandem with your soul. That's important, because otherwise it's really easy to hear darkness and shadow and want to make assumptions about evil or some type of specific religious dogma or something else. This isn't necessarily witchy or anti-witchy. It's not pagan or anti-pagan. I don't really fit into a box with the work I do. It falls somewhere in between Jungian psychology and evaluating symbols and patterns, and also intuitive development and trusting your perceptions, and then using mythic language to kind of connect the dots. But what I want to share with you today is how meaningful the shadow is. It is a potent and meaningful container. It has so much potential, and I want to give you just a little taste of that. So we're going to use this metaphor of the dark forest. We've already kind of entered it here. I've given you a little personal perspective on my dark forest that I actually grew up in. And this is common language, by the way. This isn't something that I necessarily made up. In fact, those of you who might be familiar with the work of Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes might recognize the dark forest. She actually calls the unconscious the underground forest. And then in Jungian psychology, the forest is worked with all the time as this mythic landscape where we go into these places, these spaces that they have something for us. It doesn't always have to be dark and scary and filled with ominous beings or creatures or anything of that nature, but sometimes it is. Sometimes that's how life is. But working with these images, these symbols, allows us to hold this intuitive idea, these different aspects of our psychology, our psyche, so that we can understand what it is that's trying to be communicated through us with image. So whether you're tuning into something from your outer environment and doing this, or whether this is something coming up from internally within you that you're trying to recognize and work with, it is so powerful. It's so powerful to work with shadow and to find meaning in these landscapes and these inner images. What I will say about entering the dark forest and doing this work is that curiosity is the key. It is the key to really working with your intuitive function. Without it, you start to sometimes shut down unconsciously. You might go into an ego defense where you block information from your psyche, right? The ego, this is what the ego does. It will be a gatekeeper between the conscious mind and the unconscious, and it pushes information down. Now, sometimes we are conscious of this and we're doing it intentionally, and that's called suppression. But when we are unconscious of it happening, it is called repression. And that's when the psyche or the ego does this on our behalf because it thinks the information is just too much. There's a threat there, or there's some other reason that it is repressing or pushing that down. Maybe it's to prevent fear or a fearful response. It's to prevent some type of perceived threat, future harm, things of that nature. And so this is why we use myth and metaphor. It's one of the many reasons we use it, is to creatively get around this function. So when we talk about the dark forest, instead of, hey, remember that painful thing you went through when you were 6 or 8 years old? We can refer to the dark forest to give you some psychological distance between you and that event or series of events or situation, Whether you consider it to be traumatic or not doesn't even matter. We just call them impactful moments, and we all have them. But when we use these kind of tools, what happens is you feel this sense of safety. We don't threaten the ego, which then allows us to have access to more information. That's when you start to have synchronicities occur. You start to pay attention to your dreams. You realize that these images, these feelings, these impressions, these sensations that you have are rich material to work with, and that there's nothing to fear. That doesn't mean that these images or symbols or the things that are moving through you don't have an intensity, because mine certainly did. They could be really graphic and feel like something out of a horror movie. But even still, that just means there's movements to pay attention to. There's images to unpack, symbols to understand. And when you work with someone to do that, it doesn't have to feel so daunting or frightening. In fact, you start to realize that those frightening images are just one way that your psyche is trying to get your attention. And when you give it your attention, it doesn't have to use intensity as much anymore, because it has what it's been trying to get all along. So the dark forest, in this sense, is the metaphor for that landscape that we fear, because it is filled with magic, and it's also filled with deception and problematic situations and unhealed things. So it's a wide array of experience. It's just like the literal forest itself. We can have a beautiful walk through the woods one day, and on another day we can just feel unsettled, uncomfortable, wishing we weren't out there alone, right? It produces these different images within us, and then we kind of start catching our projections. And this is where the forest, as a metaphor, we start to see what we're placing on it and into it, and that tells us so much more about what's going on within our own individual psyches. Now, one of the things I do with this work is I look for repetitive patterns. I look for unresolved issues through the same framework, right? With story, with myth, because the psyche is giving us these things. And it also speaks to really difficult and complex matters, things that are emotionally activating for us. But it turns it into material we can work with. So we're not always feeling so stressed, overwhelmed, afraid. It's really hard to accomplish anything when you're feeling that way, right? It's hard to feel regulated when you're activated, when you're triggered. And so using these creative symbols and landscapes give us access to information, somatic information, which is body-based also, not just of the mind, but of the entire body as well. So we start to look closer at our patterns, our wounds, to see what's there. What is it that's being mirrored within us? What is it that's trying to make its way into consciousness, to move into consciousness? Because all of this is communication. It's all a form of communication, so that you're given the opportunity to get to know yourself more deeply and understand what it is that's being communicated through your soul with your shadow's support. So that's kind of cool, right? It's a very different way to think about these things. Now, what I really love about fairy tales and the dark ones, you can't do it with the regular ones. I mean, you can, but it's not the same. Because the regular ones are a little watered down. They don't really have all the deep stuff. They don't really have the murderous, motifs, or the crazy lunatic, goblins and monsters and things. We need those essential components to create tension within us, to work things out. So the fairy tales really do offer us something that I felt was really lacking in spiritual conceptions. Think of it this way. What heroine is transformed by avoiding the forest, right? Like she can't walk around it. She can't think her way through it. Oh my gosh, like the way that I and some of my clients overanalyze things to try to get through instead of walking through. So walking through the forest versus trying to walk around it, something as simple as that. We start to see how potent this space is, this landscape. We can't ask someone else to go do it on our behalf. It's not going to work. We're not going to get what we need from the experience if we're not willing to walk through it ourselves. And I know you know this stuff already, but sometimes we just need it in a different language to let it kind of land differently. But the truth is, at some point, she must cross these thresholds herself. She must come up against the dragons or the beasts or the creatures, or the disappearing doors or whatever it might be, and be her own rescue. So that's the other thing I love about this, is your psyche is the key to your own rescue. You're not being saved. You're not waiting for some prince. You're not trying to make things more difficult for yourself. But throughout centuries, fairy tales have been used in this way. And the dark forest specifically has always kind of represented this unknown landscape, you know, and it really is this mythic place that teaches us another way of seeing. That's how I like to think of it, is another way of seeing. We also recover what we've left behind. So sometimes we release things, but sometimes we also recover things. What's interesting too, so the dark forest, by the way, is just one of many mythic landscapes. It's one that I am focusing on a lot, and especially when I introduce shadow work of this nature through a Jungian lens to people, because Carl Jung, let me just back up a little bit here. Carl Jung is actually the one that coined the term the shadow self. And so when I'm talking about shadow or shadow work or things of that nature, that's my training and background, is in Jungian oriented work and psychology. It isn't through another modality or anything else. I actually wrote my doctoral dissertation on the shadow. So trust me when I say this stuff, that it is so much deeper than just something you learn in a weekend workshop, and you can spend your life doing this work as I have, and you're still going to keep on discovering new things about all of these spaces. But the dark forest is not the only mythic landscape that we work with, right? It's a very popular one, as is something called the Underworld, the Labyrinth, the Crossroads. In tarot, we have the Tower, right? So there's these different kind of like thresholds. But then also you can take this path and go literally through nature, but then symbolically through nature, you have the desert, you know, being in a time of life where things have just, your resources have dried up. You don't know where you're going. You don't know what's next. You can be a little disoriented. You have the ocean, the sea. Talk about the unconscious. Oh my gosh, the vastness of the ocean. It can be beautiful and terrifying at the same time. We've got these other mythic landscapes like caves, rivers, mountains. Really, it's whatever your psyche projects as an image. The dark forest, I love especially because it also contains these underground roots. There's rocks and stones, there's creatures, there's vines, right? So all of a sudden you start thinking about this other way of how the mind becomes overgrown with things that no longer support it. And we have to cut our way through the vines, or we might have to clear a new path. We might have to find ourselves off path and get lost in the woods for a little while before we find our way again. So it really helps us in metaphor to kind of locate where we are also in our psychology. I actually want to share a little bit of an interesting one here with you. So I had this amazing opportunity with one of my clients where I witnessed a really powerful experience with her. And, you know, sometimes I ask my questions, my inquiries very much based on what they're going through. Her specific thing was working on her authentic voice. I asked her to shift this idea of authentic voice from the literal and from like the academic, like publishing world, into a mythic lens. And it was just so cool. So I just had this intuitive thought, and it was, I wonder what would happen if you treated your authentic voice like your soul. And then I had asked her, where is she, your voice? Where does she live now? And my client sat and kind of felt into that statement. She's like, I don't know why I want to say this, but I feel like my voice is caught in the bardo. And I was like, ooh, the bardo, that's a really striking image, right? So the bardo, just for those of you that might be curious, is this very liminal state. This is borrowed from a Tibetan tradition. But it's like kind of being caught between life and death, or death and rebirth is also sometimes how it's referred to. But the only thing that you can find for sure in the bardo is uncertainty itself. Sometimes it's the land of the dead. So it was interesting that she used that term. And I found out later she didn't really have a lot of resonance or understanding what the bardo was. It came to her. So we took it further. And I asked her, what would it take to recover the voice? Now remember, she's acting like her voice is soul. It's not this thing, it's her. Like, where is it? And what would it take to bring it back from the dead? She got quiet again and still. And she said, my voice is hiding among the voices of the dead, or something to that effect. Another powerful image, right? We tend to rush through these things. So part of the work is slowing it down, working with that. So we talked about that. What does that mean to have your voice be among the dead? And she realized that it was kind of lost with relatives and their voices, you know, in a literal sense of growing up in a household different than mine. And hers, she was like one of those, how do they say, you're seen but not heard kind of a thing. So her inner voice sounded like everybody else, and it didn't feel like hers at all. And hers was there, but it was caught among like these other voices. So it was hard for her to know what was her voice. It never felt true. So it was in the in between kind of state. The other thing that was interesting about that is when she tapped into that further, is it felt like it was she wasn't able to speak her truth because she didn't know what her truth was. It wasn't so clear. She didn't know what she wanted to say because she was saying what she thought she should say. So her voice kind of lived in that limbo in between. She would borrow the words and the ideas of others, because then she could play it safe. So that's what her writing looked like. And she felt it. And she's like, it feels flat. It's not what I want it to be. And this whole thing came about because she was willing to kind of explore and play in that mythic landscape. So we use this imagery and these concepts, and it was able to kind of help her understand herself more completely. And what I found fascinating, and I didn't do this is her doing the work, but I just know how to guide with the work, right? She was able to find these parts of herself there in that Bardo space as well. And then she had a realization that one of them was kind of like blocking her, and it was time to really let that part of her be laid to rest. It doesn't need to be her protector anymore. And so I gave her some unique homework. I taught her and guided her on how to create something called a death altar, and how to integrate the wisdom of this experience in this mythic landscape that we worked with. So I wanted to kind of share that because it shows you a different way of what we're talking about here. Now, all of this information is wonderful, right? But information is not what changes our lives, because we know transformation happens when we actualize information, when we integrate. So your symbolism must be personal. Otherwise, it just stays on the surface. It doesn't really have the chance to sink down into your bones or into your gut, into your womb, right? It doesn't have the opportunity to do that. And if it doesn't do that, it's no different than just reading about a dream from a book and saying like, or Googling, you know, I had this dream about blah, blah, blah. Or even AI, I'm just going to put it out there and say, sometimes you put it in there and it's just going to tell you what it's going to tell you, but it's not reading your psyche, because your psyche has those answers. So it kind of stays on the surface. It's not as personal. So I hope that this has been interesting and that you're resonating with these ideas and seeing that the shadow isn't this harmful place, right? It's not this thing within us that is trying to cause us harm. It's actually this amazing, potent container that holds things on our behalf. And when I say working with the psyche, we're also working with the soul and the shadow in this way. We're going into these places to retrieve this information. Again, sometimes things are lost and we bring it back. Other times it's meant to be released and let go. And we do that very creatively. And it's such a beautiful way to also do the work without feeling like you're just some type of project. I don't know about you guys, but I have felt that before, where I just kind of felt like I was always working on myself, like some kind of endless project. Like, when is enough digging gonna happen? How many layers are there to the onion thing? And it never, I don't know, I just kind of felt like sometimes I was going in circles. And now I know that's an ego defense. So that is actually a strategy of your ego to always keep you endlessly in a loop and never feeling fulfilled, so that you're always doing the hard work but never reaping the benefit of that work, which is why you'll just keep digging and digging and digging. Here's another little mythic structure for you to think about, which is Sisyphus. And oh my gosh, what a powerful myth. And so I'm not going to read you the whole myth. I don't have the whole story in front of me, but it's essentially the idea of pushing this boulder, right, up a mountain, only to get to the top of the mountain and then to have the boulder fall back and to have to start all over again. And that is your life. That is the cycle. That's part of what the myth looks like, is having to constantly be in this efforting place where everything looks the same, it feels the same. And this is what our patterns often look like. And what I've learned from doing this work for over 20 something years now is that our patterns are not problematic, or they can be problematic, but our patterns are predictable. And we know, if we know how to enter the pattern like a doorway, we will learn something new about ourselves. We'll uncover whatever it is that's kind of bound up within there. And there's often some type of either a complex, which I'm not going to go into deeply today, but just know there's these other energetic structures within the psyche. So I talked about the ego a little bit and the shadow a little bit. And we also have these other things called complexes. This is when you feel that charge, when you're triggered by something and you're like, oof, why did I respond that way? Why did I get so activated? Why did that thing they said feel like that? Or I thought I dealt with that or healed that. Why is that coming back around? There's often a complex going on there. And this isn't like a pop psychology thing. It's not, every complex doesn't look the same way. You can't just go Google it and say, well, what is a mother complex or what is a father complex? Again, your psyche needs to be the one that says, it shows you how that complex operates within you, because it's going to be different for you than it might be for me. We might have different words that trigger us. We might have different symptoms. We might have different statements or things. Do you ever have this situation where there's just a word that someone says and you don't know why, but for your entire life, when you hear that word, it agitates you to no end. It just makes you angry. Or a normal, typical, chill sentiment can just send you flying off the handle. Have you ever had that happen where it's like, I don't know why, it's just my thing. I don't want you to say this, or I can't handle it when I hear this, phrase or statement. That is an indicator there's probably a complex going on. There's a story going on at the heart of that energetic structure in your psyche, and it's protecting it, which is why when we get close, it feels like an electric fence. We feel almost as if there's this charge to it, which tells us there's a story, there's some energy there. So anyhow, friends, if this conversation has resonated with you today, I also want to invite you how to take all of this work further. This is about interpreting the language of your psyche within a guided and structured kind of a process, right? This isn't about some kind of book of symbols or anything of that nature, although those things are really fun. This is about taking a journey together. I've created something called the Lost Daughter series. This isn't necessarily, I'm not going to say it's not for beginners, because it really isn't beginner work. But if this is your first time hearing any of these kind of things, I want you to trust your instinct. If you feel really called to it, then you're welcome. But it is also, I tend to teach more advanced material. And so I'm not going to necessarily go into a lot of basic stuff with this series, but I'm going to go really deep. So what I've created is, it's nearly a year-long program, but it's actually a series of programs within this one container. The container is called the Lost Daughter series, and within it are 6 programs. Now, you don't have to participate in all 6 programs. If you want to just get a taste, I would say starting with the very first one is the way to go. But if you do want to join us for all 6 programs, I have an amazing deal, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment, where this is my introductory founding member kind of experience. Now, you don't have to pay an ongoing fee or an annual fee or anything of that nature, but this is going to be my signature series. So what I mean by that is is I am going to offer this every year, the same 6 programs, because they are the culmination of my life's work broken down into really important segments where we cover all of the types of things here that I've already mentioned. Plus, I'm going to go into each of those programs. And the very first one kind of does set the tone for everything. So we're going to go into what is the shadow and the ego, but again, from a very Jungian structured perspective. It's a bit academic, but really very mythic and symbolic. So I have people that are writers and counselors and therapists and healers and doctors and all different skills and backgrounds of life. I have creatives. I have people that just use this for their own personal development. And then I have people who are entrepreneurs. So it's really for women in general. Women tend to be the psyche that I speak to, right? I have a feminine voice and therefore it's just what I speak to. So everybody is welcome to join this program, the Lost Daughter series. But just know that's kind of the lens that I do see the world through. It's my voice. And so that's how I will be sharing my voice. I want to share the program details for those of you that are curious, because there's quite a bit of information here. So here's what this journey kind of looks like. So there's 6 doorways that we can enter. The first one begins with the dark forest. It's called the Dark Forest Anatomy of Psyche and Shadow, reading the hidden language of the psyche through symbol, archetype, and pattern. So we got a very, very, very small taste of that here in the first 35 minutes of what I was sharing. We do go into fairy tales, but I'm just going to read you. So this is the description for the first program. Every fairy tale begins with a crossroads. Before the heroine can reclaim what was lost, she must first enter the dark forest and learn its terrain. This program is an introduction to the symbolic architecture of the psyche through the lens of Jungian and depth psychology. We'll explore the shadow, the unconscious, archetypes, instinct, and hidden psychological forces that influence our perceptions, our relationships, and our identity. I'll draw upon the work of Carl Jung, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Marianne Woodman, James Hillman, mythology, fairy tales, and more. And we'll also talk about hidden patterns, making them visible, things of that nature. But let me carry on here. So as hidden patterns become visible, they lose much of their unconscious influence. The dark forest has always been there. This program teaches you how to navigate it with greater discernment, symbolic understanding, and psychological insight. Then there's program 2. Now, again, you don't have to join all 6 of them, but for those that would like to, I just have a very special offering for it in price and then in some of the bonus materials. Now, if you are interested in just entering the program by itself without all 6, you can do that. And I do have an introductory offer for that as well. It is currently priced almost half off of what it's going to be. Once this entire thing is fully launched and I'm out of the founding member beginning stage, which is going to be in 2027, the price will double. So each program is going to be priced at over $1,000, but right now I have every program at $565. You get to keep all the materials, they stay with you, you'll have access to them, things of that nature. There are live experiences and lessons, and there is pre-recorded content. So it is a hybrid program. It's a little bit of both. You do not have to, and they're all like this. So I'm going to do all 6 of them in the same kind of way, where there are live sessions for Q&A and for interaction, but then pre-recorded material that kind of goes through its own flow, and then we meet together to discuss, okay? So let's go into program number 2. And I know I'm talking fast because I want to share this with you all, and I have it right here in front of me. So program number 2 is called Nikia, Complexes and the Ghosts of the Psyche. So I was just talking a little bit about complexes. We'll go deeper into that. Hidden psychological forces that influence thought, emotion, and relationship. Much of what we call personality is not conscious at all. Beneath our thoughts, choices, and the relationships live hidden psychological structures that influence our perceptions, our memories, our emotions, our behavior without our awareness. In Jungian psychology, they are these autonomous inner worlds called complexes. A complex is a splinter of the psyche. It is a charged cluster of memory, emotion, and image. and it often can act against our conscious will. Jung called them autonomous partial personalities. I always find that so fascinating. These are the ghosts who speak through our reactions, our relationships, and our compulsions. In this program, we will name them, we'll trace their origins, and we'll begin the painstaking necessary work of integration. This program offers an in-depth exploration of psychological complexes through the lens of Jungian and archetypal psychology, mythology, fairy tales, dreams, and symbolic analysis. We'll look at how complexes are formed, why they become emotionally charged, how they influence our identity and our relationships, and why they emerge during periods of stress, conflict, and transition. You'll learn language of the unconscious, identifying these signature complexes, and understand how these patterns influence our perceptions, our reactions, right? Those kind of recurring life experiences. The ghosts of the psyche are not supernatural, they're psychological, they're emotional, they're energetic. And what remains unconscious appears to come from outside of us. This program, though, provides a depth psychological framework for recognizing these inner hidden figures that haunt us so that they can finally be understood. Now, program number 3. Thanks for bearing with me. We're getting there, guys. Mythic patterns of projection and recollection. So this is a big one about projection, but also other mythic patterns, which I find fascinating. We'll distinguish what belongs to you from what the psyche sees or places on other people. That's what projection is. So we don't see others as they are. We see them as we are, right? So projection is the psyche's way of externalizing what it cannot yet hold within us. Jung called it the meeting of the unacknowledged self in another. Estes described the way the woman gives the voice away to a lover, to a teacher, to a predator, and the fierce labor of reclaiming her voice. Woodman understood it as the loss of one's reflection. Projection keeps us captive to other stories. Recollection is the act of returning to one's own. Every relationship, every conflict, every fascination, and aversion has the potential to reveal something about the hidden dynamics of the psyche. In Jungian psychology, this process is known as projection, the unconscious tendency to hand over things to other people, right? The unlived qualities within us, our fears, our desires, potential that we even see in other could be the denial of it within ourselves. And so this program is offering an in-depth exploration of projection as one of the psyche's most influential and misunderstood processes. We'll examine how projection shapes our relationships, why we're attracted to certain things, why we have conflict. We'll talk about transference, we'll talk about shadow work and all of these, we'll talk about the development of consciousness, and we'll explore why we're drawn or repelled to or from certain people, why others evoke powerful emotional reactions, and how unconscious projections influence our perception. And there's so much more, and honestly, I'm just skimming through some of this because it's a lot. Program number 4, catabasis, the feminine descent. Descent as a psychological initiation. Every descent begins with a knowing that we can no longer continue with things as they once were. What modern culture often interprets as anxiety, depression, burnout, collapse, depth psychology views as the beginning of an encounter with the unconscious. In this program, we'll explore patterns of catabasis. I can never say that correctly. I know it in my bones, but the word always gets tripped up. This is a mythic descent into the underworld. It is a symbolic framework for understanding psychological transformation. So we're going to look at symbolic meaning of descent, the processes that accompany these things, especially anxiety, depression, neurosis, loss, transformation. We'll look at archetypal dynamics of descent, the dissolution of certain identities, roles of the unconscious in times of transition, symbolic meaning, and things that are sometimes seen as pathology when there is a really deep, rich archetypal symbolism within it. The underworld is not a place of death and endings. It is where the psyche dismantles what no longer serves and preparing the ground for a more authentic way of being. Then we have program number 5, one of my favorites. It's called Devouring Mother and Father, Devouring Mother, Dark Father, Archetypal Patterns of Identity, Relationship, and Self-Worth. The mother and father complexes are among the most formative forces in the human psyche. Before we develop a conscious identity, we inherit these powerful psychological images of mother and father. These inner figures become the foundation upon which we build our relationships, our self-worth, relationship to authority, belonging, and understanding of love itself. When these forces become distorted, they detrimentally influence the personality for decades, even without our complete awareness. So this program explores the psychology of the mother and the father complexes through the lens of Jungian and archetypal psychology. We will look at mythology, same kind of thing, fairy tales, dreams, symbolic analysis. We'll also look at the devouring mother and the dark father and how this shows up in attachment, our identities, boundaries, intimacy, and something that Jung called the process of individuation, which is a big part of the work that we're doing in all of these programs here, which is really coming home to who we are, right? The unfolding of the self in service to the soul. So we'll talk about distinguishing personal experience from archetypal pattern. We'll look at complexes, parental complexes, how they influence our adult life, and understanding why these unconscious dynamics are repeated across generations. And then finally, here we are. Program number 6 is called Sinister Shadow, Armoring and Predatory Impulses. This is one of my favorite programs. I'm so excited about this one. Psychological discernment, manipulation, and hidden vulnerabilities. Every defensive structure was once some kind of act of survival. Perfectionism, hypervigilance, compulsivity, there's compensation that we have in the psyche, all of these different things, right? And Jung would call them the ego's armor against an environment that took more than it gave. In this program, we're going to learn to distinguish the monsters we fear from those that we become and start the work of conscious disarmament. So looking at how we protect ourselves with this armoring, with these patterns, with our ego defenses. We'll also talk about attachment theory, things of that nature. We'll talk about why certain things show up as far as our development, survival strategies. We'll look at why certain people appear in our systems and exploit our blind spots. We'll talk about this distinguishing between the intuition, discernment, and also like ego defenses like denial and not wanting to look, not wanting to see. So this program is going to cover ego defenses, psychological armoring, predatory dynamics, a whole bunch more. I'm just going to skim through. We're going to look at survival strategies, the psychological masks that we wear, including the relationship between the persona and the shadow and the ego. And it's quite interesting how they all are in tandem with one another. And it makes a huge difference understanding these things. So we also will focus on the discernment of recognizing manipulation, coercion, narcissistic and psychopathic patterns, and the unconscious vulnerabilities that make us susceptible to them. So there it is. That's it. Those are the 6 programs. And I know it's a lot and it's overwhelming, and I'm so excited. And really the heart of this work is about tracing these perceptions somatically, intuitively. You know it already. We just didn't always have a voice for these things. And I like to move to trace these things through the body, through the breath, through our beliefs. So we work with the wounds that bring us all here, right? We're intelligent, we're capable, we're self-aware, and yet our patterns return. So we do kind of come with this idea that all of us are wounded on some level, but then we're also learning to receive on some level too. And so that's part of what's offered in these programs, is showing us there's more to that story. And then there's a whole lot that changes as we go through this. The understanding of the pattern, why it keeps returning, what's going on. There's multiple patterns we're all living out and living through. And you start to kind of feel a sense of agency within all of that, which is really quite remarkable and empowering, if I might say. Now, I want to end here and say there are early enrollment bonuses. This is early enrollment for the next few days. So the first one is the heavy armor. It's called the Attachment, Wounds, and Ego Defenses. This is a complete workbook and recorded session drawn from my foundational work on attachment theory and ego defenses, the psyche's most fortified certified chambers, offered here as a threshold gift for those who choose to descend before the deadline. So that is the workbook and the recorded session. That will expire. This bonus expires on August 2nd at 11:59 p.m. The second early enrollment bonus is this. It's called Into the Dark Forest, the Secret Language of the Shadow. You're watching it now. This recording will stay with you. It's just a bonus. You get to keep this. I'm going to edit out the whole back end of this so that you just have the beginning about the psyche and all of that information that I shared just as a thank you and as a nice little bonus. Then we have another bonus that is only for the first 8 women. Now, I already have people claiming this, so I'll have to look and see where we're at in our numbers by the time this, the end of this day or what have you. But this is only for the first 8 women. And again, some of those have already been claimed. And I am offering a 50-minute private consult with you on the phone. So this is a 50-minute consult where we can talk about your patterns. You can pick one of these programs to kind of look at and say, this is the one where I think I need the help or the support. And it's an opportunity for us to be in this rare, intimate container, right? Where you get to do the inner work and it's held in this direct relationship with presence and care. Again, that's only for the first 8 women because that work, as much as I love it, I don't have a lot of room in my calendar for private work anymore these days. And so that is available until, well, the first 8 women claim it. So there's that. Now, here's the other thing. If you do happen to purchase the entire Lost Daughter series, you get a couple things here. You're going to save an automatic $282 on the, what is it called? The founding member price. But when this actually launches in 2027, you'll end up saving it'll be almost $3,500 total, because this price is going to go up because the program prices will go to their full price in 2027. So right now it's a $282 savings. But again, that will jump up. And so you will get access to all 6 of these programs. I kind of have them in like an arc, right? And so they're also matched up to the season. I was generous as far as the seasons go. So we're skipping like certain holidays and we're not going to be doing work around those times. So you don't have to worry about any of that. And there's gaps in between. So we're not running from one program right into the next. I think the closest program start time between is like maybe 3 weeks or something like that. I think there's like a 3-week gap or 2-week gap. That's the shortest gap between them. And I believe we're taking off the entire month of December. I'll have to check and see. So again, we're avoiding most of the holidays. So if any of this resonates, if you feel the pull, the curiosity, the longing for something more, trust it. I'd love to have you join me. I really believe in trusting the psyche and invite you to take that step if it resonates. I'd be honored to have you join us in this somatic, mythic, ritual experience of the Lost Daughter series. All right, sweet friends, I did it. I stuck to pretty much an hour, which is like amazing for me, because anybody that knows me personally, I can talk and I will talk and talk and tell you it's an hour and be there for almost 2. So if you have any questions, please reach out. Otherwise, the links are here below. And again, I'm going to come back through and look at all of your comments and reflect on what you're sharing. And so if there's something you feel like asking and you don't want to put it here, please feel free to ask our office or email our office. And so again, that information is melissa@melissacorder.com. Thank you all for spending the time with me today, and I hope to see you soon. Take care.